Hello, I'm Robert Dakota of Worldviews Media, and I'm here to introduce and reintroduce William Henry. We're going to have a little bit of a follow-up conversation from the conversation we had with Brian and Randall the other day, William.
Okay.
I was thinking maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on the Grail and what you're going to bring to the gathering in Arizona in April.
Yeah, I think it's such a great topic, the Grail, to be talking about with Randall, Brian, people that have this kind of alternative history perspective, because the Grail has such a long and rich history. I first started studying it in 1982, so that's 40 years ago. And
Wow.
I mean, I still couldn't tell you I know exactly what the Grail is. In fact, nobody can. It's often thought of as having at least four different aspects or interpretations on what it is. Some think it's a cup that was present at the Last Supper when Jesus gathered the disciples together on the eve of the crucifixion. And his intention with the Grail and at this Last Supper is to empower the disciples to activate their latent healing capabilities, because he's going to send them out then to heal the sick, raise the dead, preach the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And so the Grail seems to have been a part of that transmission, if you will, that he imparted to the disciples. And the idea is that this cup, the Grail, which, by the way, does not appear in the Bible. This is all Christian legend, Christian symbolism, but it's a very important part of it, in fact. But the idea is that this cup is present at the Last Supper. Then it turns up at the crucifixion, either in the hands of Joseph of Arimathea, who is Jesus's wealthy uncle, financier, part of the Sanhedrin, Essene mystic, and a whole lot more. So it's either in the hand of Joseph of Arimathea or it's in the hand of Mary Magdalene, who is Jesus's chief apostle, acknowledged by Christianity as such. Some believe his companion, his wife, mother of his children. One or the other, Joseph or Mary, at the crucifixion, reaches up and catches the transmuted blood and water spurting from Jesus's body. A Roman centurion had pierced his side. This blood is spurting from that open wound, and they catch a blood sample with this cup. So it's a blood sample that they've now got in this Grail cup. It's a blood sample, it's a DNA sample. This is very important because at this moment, Jesus has already begun the process of transfiguration. His resurrection and ascension is already underway while still on the cross. So that's why it's very important to get this blood sample. And after the crucifixion, this cup with the DNA blood sample disappears. It goes to southern France with Mary Magdalene, if you believe that story, or it goes to Glastonbury in England with Joseph, the site of the first Christian church that was founded by Joseph of Arimathea. In both locations, southern France, southwestern England, have centuries of history, legend, mythology that says the Grail was indeed brought to those sites. And at each of those locations, you're introduced to the idea that the Grail isn't actually a cup or a blood sample, it's a bloodline. Both the British and the French royalty trace their origins to the Holy Family, to Jesus, Mary Magdalene, and their offspring, because in this perspective, they believe that Jesus and Mary Magdalene had children, and their children carried on the Grail bloodline. This is, of course, the Da Vinci Code material that Dan Brown wrote so well about and so popularly as well. But there's a third take on what the Grail is, and that is that the Grail is not a cup, it's not a bloodline, it's in fact a stone. In the 13th century, a German poet named Wolfgang von Aschenbach introduced the idea that the Grail is a stone that fell from heaven. And not just any stone, it's a wish-fulfilling gem. If you have this Grail stone, you can turn a wasteland into a garden. You can transmute one thing into another, leading some researchers to equate it with the Emerald Tablet of Hermes. the stone of transmutation spoken of in the Emerald Tablet and the Grail seem to be pretty resonant with one another. And I think there's a case to be made for that, because most certainly Jesus and the disciples would have been interested in the subject of transmutation. Jesus demonstrated this. He performed miracles where he transmuted one thing into another. He multiplied loaves and fishes. He raised the dead. He performed other miracles of transmutation. Maybe there was this stone involved. It's very interesting that recent scholarship has traced the origin of Wolfram von Aschenbach's poem to Tibet, specifically to the Tibetan concept of the Chintamani stone, the wish-fulfilling gem of Tibetan Buddhism. That's an extraterrestrial stone, a consciousness stone that can also transmute one thing into another, and especially can transmute the human body into what they call the rainbow light body. Well, most certainly Jesus would have been interested in this aspect of the Grail as well. So it is quite possible that the Grail stone and the Chintamani stone of Tibetan Buddhism, the wish-fulfilling gem, are the same thing. And that was a real eye-opener for me, Robert, because when I started researching the Grail more heavily and directly in the late 90s, I was actually following President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Grail quest. Most people know that the Nazis were looking for the Holy Grail in the early 1930s, and few realize that so was FDR. He, along with his two-term Secretary of Agriculture and third-term Vice President, Henry A. Wallace, along with a third man, a Russian mystic and guru named Nicholas Rurik, reformed the archetypal trio of the three wise men. And FDR and Wallace sent Rurik to Mongolia in search of a stone, a wish-fulfilling stone. This has to be the Chintamani stone. It was thought to be located in Shambhala, the realm of the immortals. And the story is told that Rurik had acquired a piece of this stone in the 1920s and then returned it. And FDR then sent him back to Mongolia, seeking signs of the second coming and also the secrets of this stone. And it's thought that it's quite possible that Rurik was actually successful in recovering a stone on behalf of FDR. So that brings this story out of like the 13th century into the 20th century and leaves us wondering here in the 21st century, well, where's the stone today?
Wow, there's so many things you said in there. Like, for example, a stone from the sky.
Yeah.
Recently, I saw the stone that these African guys have found where it's electric magnetic and they can actually hook a light up to it. I don't know. Then there's the stone that's in Mecca that they're circling around.
Right.
And that came from the sky.
Right.
And then doesn't the King of England or the throne sit on a particular stone that they're very coveted of? And you would think if it's just a stone, what's the big deal?
Right. Yeah, that's the stone of destiny. That's thought to be the stone that Jacob laid his head on when he fell into a dream and saw a ladder, tower, or stairway to heaven reaching into the heavens. It's thought to be that actual stone. I don't know if it is or not, but the Chintamani stone is well known. I made a significant, what I think of as a significant contribution to the whole Salvator Mundi, Leonardo da Vinci controversy. Several years ago, a painting of Christ as Salvator Mundi, the savior of the world, was revealed as a lost Leonardo. Yeah. And in the painting, he's holding this crystalline orb, this transparent orb with 3 dots on it. Well, that's the symbol of the Chintamani. The triple dots in Tibetan Buddhism symbolizes the Chintamani stone. And I put a A to B comparison of Christ as Salvator Mundi holding the stone beside bodhisattvas holding the transparent orb of the Chintamani stone, and they're interchangeable images. And so at the time this Leonardo painting was being discovered and discussed by experts and aficionados as a lost Leonardo, they were overlooking the triple dot symbolism on that stone. They were calling attention to it and wondering if Leonardo had actually painted it, because it didn't look quite like his style. And there were some optical imperfections in the way it was presented. But my point was, you're missing the entire forest by looking at a tree. Leonardo has got Salvator Mundi holding this transparent orb. He's holding the wish-fulfilling gem in his hand, and that's what the triple dots mean on it. That painting sold for $453 million and was thought to have been on its way to the Louvre in Abu Dhabi, but it's since disappeared. Nobody knows where it is. And in my opinion, it's because of the inherent power infused within the painting, but that's a whole other subject.
Wow, that's something that I didn't hear about for sure. But I did know Nicholas Rourke had that Trinity symbol,
Yes, he did.
and that represents the stone.
That represents the Chintamani, right? And Rourke adopted it as the logo for his cultural institute. But it has ancient origins, and it's one way that you can track the Chintamani. And it's very interesting that you'll often see, especially in Christian art as well as Buddhist art, you'll see the Buddha wearing a cloak or garment that was originally covered with gold, that is fringed with the triple dot symbol all around its edge, and that's symbolic of his robe of light or his garment of light. And that's one of the purposes of acquiring this stone, is that it transmutes the body into light.
So I heard you and Randall say, or speaking amongst each other, you were talking about that the Grail is more than just one thing.
Right.
That it may represent several things, or
exactly. Exactly.
Can you speak a little bit more about the wand?
Yeah, so I spoke of 3 different perspectives on what the Grail is. It could be a cup, a blood sample, it could be a bloodline, it could be a stone. But I'm also aware that the Grail poets used word plays and puns to conceal the true nature of the Grail. And I started to just play with those word plays and puns by using one of their techniques. For example, if you take the first letter S off the word stone, you're left with the word tone. Well, what if the Grail is a tone or a frequency that can transmute one thing into another? That's a whole different kettle of fish, and that's certainly possible. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word is a tone, the Word is a vibration. And so what if Jesus is a master of cosmic frequencies or vibrations? Does this explain then the earliest Christian art, that when they portrayed Jesus performing the miracles up until the year about 200 AD, so these are the earliest Christians, they portrayed Jesus as a magi with a rod or a wand in his hand performing the miracles. And the question becomes, is this like some actual Harry Potter wand? Is there a wand type technology out there somewhere that Jesus utilized to perform the miracles? Or could that rod or wand be sort of like a symbol? When a symphony conductor stands in front of the symphony, he's got a stick in his hand. It's called the baton. And there's nothing inherently powerful about the baton, but when that conductor starts waving it, he can make something really profound happen with an orchestra or a symphony. What if Jesus was utilizing the rod or wand as an instrument or a tool to conduct universal frequencies? And via this, he could transmute one thing into another, raise Lazarus from the dead, multiply loaves and fishes, turn water into wine. All of the miracles that where one thing was transmuted into another, where Jesus transmuted one thing into another, the first Christians said or showed those miracles were performed with this rod or wand. And then after the time of the church councils in 325 AD, that rod or wand disappears and he just waves his hand when he's performing the miracles. So I always go back, try to get to the earliest source, and the earliest Christians were pretty emphatic. He was a magi and he had a wand, but he utilized it, I think, to conduct a cosmic force, perhaps a tone or a frequency.
Yeah, I think when you start hearing these stories over and over again, and legends, mythologies, and then historical references in different ways, you're onto something. Otherwise, why would it be there in the first place?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
it sounds
exactly.
like from the earliest times, and what you mentioned is that this wand disappears even from the literature
Yeah.
early
Well,
on.
it from Christian literature, but there's a whole uh praxis of Jewish legends that tell us that it's a branch made from the tree of life, that in fact it originated in the Garden of Eden. And when Adam and Eve were evicted from Eden, they brought this rotter wand with them, and it was passed along through their bloodline. Enoch possessed it, Moses possessed it, and ultimately Jesus acquires it. And perhaps it's still out there somewhere, awaiting rediscovery.
Huh, that's bizarre. Why don't we hear these stories regularly? Why?
How
Yeah,
much more fun Sunday school would have been if we, were really taught Jesus was a magi, and these alchemical processes of transmutation and magic were what they were doing.
I would have been there every Sunday.
Right.
So, so we have a wand and a stone, and
Yeah.
are there other elements and a chalice? And it's
Yeah.
so here's another thought that comes to my mind. If there's a chalice collecting blood, now you have a DNA sample.
Right.
Maybe they're preserving that DNA sample for a specific reason.
Absolutely.
Um,
The idea is that that blood sample was brought to Glastonbury by Joseph of Arimathea and is thought to still be there, widely sought throughout the centuries. Because again, the idea would be that if you can somehow match the DNA or the state of the blood of Christ as he's transmuting his body into light, perhaps you can teach ordinary individuals how to do that same transmutation. That's why it's valuable.
yeah, and then if you can do that, then I guess the higher powers of structures aren't necessarily so
No.
necessary.
Right. And we should also layer this in too, that the human body itself is considered to be the vessel. And if you're trying to locate the stone in the body, well, that's the pineal gland, which is referred to as the philosopher's stone. And the pineal gland, of course, is a manufacturing plant of secretions and oils that contain the secrets of transmuting the human body into light. So this all starts to get not really convoluted, but you have to recognize that it ultimately is speaking about the human body itself as the vessel, and that there's something we can do to our body to kickstart this miraculous process of transfiguration or transmutation. And that could be the ultimate secret of the Grail. All who seek the Grail, including, for example, the Knights Templar, we're very, very interested in how you cleanse and purify human blood, how you enlighten human blood for longevity, for increased intelligence, spiritual capacity, healing abilities, and beyond.
In essence, this is a really ancient mystery that people have been trying to solve, or have been going around collecting the potential items to get them together, or the Grail together. It seems like it's philosophical and literal.
It is. I mean, well, all myths and legends are susceptible to 7 levels of interpretation: the literal, the historical, the symbolic, the metaphorical, the astronomical, the anatomical, and then the seventh is the anagogical, which refers to the process of ascension. And so a lot of people get hung up. They say, oh, well, Jesus never existed. He's just the son, and it's all astrotheology. And my response is, very good. You just mastered one of the 7 levels of interpretation. What about the other 6? And that's where we have to really go broad and understand that all of these symbols and myths ultimately have these multiple levels of interpretation, but especially are aimed at our anatomy, helping us to understand something about the mystical functioning of our body.
So in essence, we are the universe.
Yes.
I heard Randall mention that this new plasmoid unification model that Malcolm Bendel is working on also has medical applications, and that there's healing processes. So these things can be overlapping. Is that how you see it? That
Yeah,
the
I'm very,
technology is sort of overlapping there?
yeah, while I'm not familiar with exactly what he's talking about with that plasma technology, I am interested in the ancient understanding about plasma and plasma beings, especially the ancient Egyptians made it very clear that they had a deep understanding of that. And when you talk about any kind of solar beings connected with the sun, for example, the Buddha was a child of the sun. The sun is plasma. So therefore, we're talking about any luminous or radiant beings as potentially being plasma beings.
Uh-huh. Wow. So the spirituality or the religious systems that we see, the institutions, I would call them, that we
Mhm.
see today are supposed to be giving us access to this, but it seems like they're kind of failing on that. Am I correct?
Yeah, I would, well, that, yeah, you could look at it that way, but you could also look at it perhaps from the perspective that they have preserved this teaching for a very long time. And perhaps now is the time where we develop the eyes to see what the symbolism actually refers to. So in a way, then they've done us a favor by so faithfully reproducing and repeating the story without changing it very much. And now we have the eyes to see the inner or mystical meaning of what's going on.
Well, it seems like these kind of things are very common in cultures all over the world. They're recording things in songs and mythologies
Yeah,
and then later literature, but a lot of it, the ancient stuff, is in symbolism and
right.
the music and traditions that you carry on to tell you
Yeah.
some story about the past that needs to be remembered for the present.
Yeah, because the songs, the symbols speak to the subconscious, and that's where we really, get into our deep connection to true cosmic power.
Is there anything you would like to leave us with that we can expect to hear from you in April?
Yeah, you're going to come away from this event with not only a greater understanding about what the Grail is, but about yourself as well, with tools and ideas that you can use to actually start on this process of activating your own inner Grail. And that's really exciting. And so it's an invitation to explore wonderful myths and legends, but also to unlock deep aspects of yourself as well.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting weekend. I'm looking forward to it myself.
Me too.
So, thanks again for your time, and we'll catch up
Pleasure.
again soon.
Look forward to it. Thanks, Robert.
All right,
Bye.
thank you.